Okay, so I know that you answered something like this in the chat, but just in case, because I've seen a couple of people ask this, how much class time do you spend on this?
Yeah, and I can definitely see that being a concern or a question to ask because it could take a lot of time to be able to do it. I've done it a couple different ways. So at first, when I did it, we did it in like a regular U.S. history class. But what I would do is I would tell kids about it, and I would kind of introduce the documents and introduce in the fall. And then I would let them know that this is going to be a year-long research project. And part of the reason that we're doing it is because those historical thinking skills and the things that we're working on translate to everything that we do throughout the year, and that it'll culminate in a cool project in the spring. And so we would come back to it from time to time, and those first 3 or 4 steps we would do throughout the year. And then I would spend about 2 weeks or so in the spring finishing it up and also delving deeper into the war itself and some of the issues around the war. And I've done things like had a footlocker come in from the National World War II Museum and with artifacts and some other stuff like that. But I also have done it more recently. Had the luxury of having an elective class where I could, for a whole semester, I could pretty much spend as much time as I wanted to on it. But I recognize that that's kind of a luxury and not the norm.
Awesome. Okay, here's a question from Chuck Taft. He says, have you worked with any World War I soldiers as well? And he's wondering about the info search and accessibility for the early 1900s.
I have. We did one World War I soldier. Miller, in this case, was Millard Corson of Madison, Maine, and I actually was fortunate to travel with National History Day to the World War I sites and visit his grave at the Wazan Cemetery in France. And those records are more difficult. The further back you go, the harder it is to find information. But they do have the IDPF files. They tend to have less information in them. And I've actually found there's some really, I'm not sure about your community, but here in Maine, there was an effort through the National Guard for the World War I Centennial Commission to identify records and information about people in your community who served. And so in that case, I found the best connection was the historian of the National Guard here in Maine, who had tons of information and was very helpful. That sort of thing doesn't seem to exist for World War II, so that's maybe a difference there.
Awesome. Okay, a question from Julia Wilson. How many students do you have participating in the project, and in what size groups do they work?
So I have usually I will have 4 sections of, when I used to do it, I had 4 sections of U.S. history with like 17 kids in a class, and we would all work on it together. More recently in the elective that I do, it's like 20 to 22 kids, so it's a little bit different. It's easier with a smaller group for sure. And what was the second part of the question, sorry, besides the numbers?
Oh yeah, no worries. Like what size groups do they work in usually? Do they do it together or do they each have an individual thing?
Yeah, so there's different aspects of it that the group will work on. And the way I've done it is I've taken those 6 steps and put kids in groups basically and say, this is your area of expertise. And then we'll put it together into a final like report, if you will, profile, however you want to put it. And so depending on the size of the class, you might have groups of 3 or 4, and you can kind of do it that way.
Awesome. Okay, from Shannon Mathis, how did you get started with this activity, and what are your suggestions about incorporating it into your other lessons?
The way I got started with it was we took that travel trip to France, and I was kind of just along as a chaperone. And one of the items added to the itinerary was the Rhône American Cemetery in southern France. And I did not even know that it existed. I knew about Normandy. I did not know that there were other cemeteries. And when we got there, Alison Labersa, the associate at the cemetery, she asked us if we could do this work. She was saying that they had fewer and fewer visitors because for a long time it was families who came to visit, and that was dissipating over time. And they were changing their focus to focus more on education. And one of the things they wanted to do to encourage visits was to tell the stories of the people buried in the cemetery. And so she was saying, can you help us tell the stories of these soldiers from Maine? That's how I got started with it. And then I quickly learned from other people that there are other organizations also doing this work. I mentioned National History Day, the American Battle Monuments Commission, and I think there are others as well that are out there doing the work. And what was the second part? I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah, no worries. What are your suggestions about incorporating it into other lessons?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a way that you can make this smaller. You can focus on one aspect of the war. You can focus on someone local. If there's a family in your community, sometimes my school doesn't have this, but some schools, they have the names like on a plaque of, if your school's old enough, soldiers who maybe were killed in the Second World War who went to your school, and you can pick one of those names, and then what can we learn about the war, and how can we what was this person doing during the war, and keep it small. You don't necessarily have to contact the family, or you can just, whatever the family wants to tell you in an email. You don't have to do the oral interviews, and you can kind of limit the scope of it and just have, and I've had colleagues that have done this here in Maine, and they've really, boiled it down to just a couple of weeks total.
Awesome. Great. Just as a warning to everybody, we have about 10 minutes before I'm going to do a hard stop. So I'm going to try to get through, I see like 8 more questions. I'm going to get through as many as I can with Shane, and then we're going to give you guys a 5-minute break. So just warning. All right. From Brianne Wegter. I missed Monica Pahovich. From Monica Pahovich, she has a question on accessing service records. She says she tries to access her great uncle's record and was told that only children can request that. How do you get around that?
It's a different process, and I do have a link to it in my presentation to the website. And it's absolutely true. There's an easy process if you're the next of kin, and there's a more complicated process if you're not, unfortunately. But under the Freedom of Information Act, you can get access to the documents, and there is a fee, and it's based on the size of the document that you get. So you don't know what the fee is until the document is found, and then they communicate to you based on the size of it how much it'll cost. And we've had documents that have been $25. We've had documents that have been $150. And we've even said no to a document when it was $150 because we didn't have the money and we weren't sure how much is in there that would be helpful. Sometimes the documents have a lot of information in there, but it's not necessarily helpful, and you don't really know if it is or it isn't until you get it. The Robert T. Waugh file was huge. The student paid, he was super enthusiastic. He paid out of his own pocket to get that file, and I think it was $150 for that one. And most of it were these letters back and forth that I kind of hinted at from the family asking the U.S. government to change his information, and then the response over the course of 60 years. So that's what most of that file was. That's part of the reason why we don't necessarily spend, if we don't have the money, that much to get the bigger file.
Okay, great. All right. Now, a question from Brianne Wegter. Do you have any recommendations for making a project like this smaller but still meaningful for teachers who have 12 weeks or so to teach U.S. history?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely start with, so the way I've done it is I will actually pick ahead of time myself the subject, the person, and then find the primary source in the documents or in the research, and then use that to hook the students, kind of like what we did today with the QFT, and then ask them to find out what we can to answer the question, and then make the connection to the person. And say, what can we tell about this person that will bring this person to life? And then you can keep it simple. Where they were from, what kind of job they had, and what did they do in the war? What battles were they involved in? And you could just kind of keep it at that level. Maybe make a connection to the family. Maybe invite someone from the family to come in for a class period if they're willing and share. We've had this happen a couple of times. Share photos, share uniform, share stuff out of the Foot Locker that they had. And that would be a way of keeping it simple. And when I first started doing it, that's really all that we did. It's only recently that we've expanded it.
Awesome. Okay. We have a question from Marcone, who asked if this presentation can be shared with the school's librarian or with other teachers. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, it's fine by me. Yeah, I've done this presentation a couple of times. More or less the same presentation, if you will, here in Maine, and so yeah, it's fine by me to share. Yeah.
Great, awesome. And then from Jennifer Masood, is there, oh yeah, the fee to access the IDPF, and if so, does the school cover that fee? So you just talked about the fees.
Yeah, my school doesn't cover it. However, with some media attention, as you saw on the first one, I had people come forward and donate hundreds of dollars, believe it or not. People who were just interested, they had a particular mindset or a pre they had like this perception of what was going on in schools, and they felt like this challenged that, and they were so impressed by it that they gave money. So very quickly, we had hundreds of dollars available for getting the files.
Great, awesome. Okay, and then there have been a couple questions asking about whether you think this this would be doable as like an after-school club or like a smaller scale activity. Like, do you think that that would be possible?
Absolutely. I mentioned the Rho Kappa that I started this year. Those were all students who last year had participated in the elective class. I mean, they aren't all, but many of them were last year in the elective class, and were just enjoyed the work and wanted to keep doing it. And I have found that even kids that aren't interested in history, I mean, they're somewhat interested maybe, but it's not their favorite thing.
Mm-hmm.
They like the idea of making connections with the families. They're like people persons, and they like hearing those stories directly from the family. And they like the idea of educating the community, doing something in the community. So I think it brings in kids with different ways of thinking about history, I guess.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks. I think I got through all the questions. If I missed yours and you think it's very important, feel free to email me and I can send it along to Shane. He did, in case anybody missed it, he was very kind and shared the presentation PowerPoint in this chat, but I can also email that around in my roundup email at the end of the day. And like I said, we are going to be making all of these presentations, the recordings, available as well. So you'll have this whole presentation in addition to the PowerPoint itself. So yeah, I guess if we don't have any more questions, we're actually going to get about a 9-minute break instead of just a 5-minute break. But thank you so much, Shane.
Thank you.